and also the early modern period. And found this interesting picture. One of these images was actually used for the cover image of Ronald Hutton's recent work, The Witch. Now, these two ladies on their brooms are actually heretics. They are Waldenses, also known as Vaudois. I have often wondered, but not checked, whether Vaudois is where we get the word voodoo from. But the Waldensians were a heretical Protestant sect, and it's interesting that here they are being caricatured as witches, and they are drawn in the marginalia of a poem from Martin Le France, The Champion of Women, which was written around 1440. And see, they've got these very practical boots on under their skirts, very good. It's interesting, this one's got a brush on her bosom, and the other one just seems to be riding on a stick. And you can see at the top it says Des Vaudois in the old script there, which is how we know they're meant to be Waldensians or Vaudois. So, and in fact, there aren't that many depictions of flying witches that I could, well, at least that I could find on the internet. So it's interesting how this trope gets perpetuated. So the first thing to think about is the origin of the word witch, and how it gets used in later centuries, for that matter. And what we have, the illustration on the right there, is the a page from the Lachnunga or Leech book, which was an Anglo-Saxon manuscript that was a compendium of all things herbal and has things like the 9 herbs charm in it. So, the origins of the word witch. Old English witche, because double C is ch in Old English. So a witche was a female magician or sorceress. Later came to mean a woman who had dealings with the devil or evil spirits, and through their cooperation could perform supernatural acts. So this is obviously a later Christian interpretation. Now, witche is the feminine form of Old English witcha, meaning spelt, which is where we get our modern word Wicca, the name of the religion. Wicca or witcher, sorcerer, wizard, man who practices witchcraft or magic. From the verb witchian, to practice witchcraft, which we can compare with Low German Wiccan, or Wiccan to use witchcraft, and a Wicca, Witchka, not sure how you would pronounce that in Low German, a soothsayer. So the Oxford English Dictionary says it's of uncertain origin. This is from etymologyonline.com, by the way. So the etymology of which is pretty contested. Also, it's been suggested that there's a connection with Old English wigle, divination, not to be confused with wiggly, and wig or we, an idol. Possibly there's a connection with Proto-Germanic wikias, a necromancer, somebody who wakes the dead. Doesn't necessarily mean that you actually interact with icky dead body parts. From Proto-Indo-European vegio, from the Proto-Indo-European root veg, to be strong or lively, and there's a related verb in German, I think, but I can't think what it is right now. Vegan, something like that. Anyway, there you go. So it's always amused me that the name of our religion, Wicca, is a mispronunciation of an Old English word meaning a male witch. So anyway, certainly gives the lie to the idea that only women can be witches, because it's right there, baked into the language, that there are male and female witches, and doubtless non-binary too, but they hadn't discovered non-binary people back then. Well, maybe they had, but they didn't have a word for it. So the trope of flying witches, here we have a group of people gathering round, looking at a goat's bottom in some considerable fascination, whilst there are witches and devils flitting about in the sky above them. So we've got one person riding on a broom, two people riding on a broom, and then there's a devil carrying somebody, and appears to be a devil riding a very large bird, and a person riding like a cat or a dog or something. Fascinating. I'll have an ounce of whatever the person was on who drew this. Yes, there seems to be a lot of fascination with animals' bottoms in this picture for some very bizarre reason. Anyway, that's enough about the picture. So the key themes of witchcraft in the Middle Ages, we have the concept of Herodias. Now, Herodias was a character in the Bible, the mother of Salome, who asked for the head of John the Baptist on a plate. So she was obviously a good candidate for ending up wandering the earth in an unsettled sort of manner. And Diana, the Roman moon goddess. And as we all know, in the Gospel of the Witches, Il Vangelo delle Streghe, compiled by Charles Leyland from the correspondence of one Maddalena, whether she actually existed as anything other than a figment of Charles Leyland's prolific imagination, we do not know. But anyway, I think there is independent documentary evidence outside of Charles Godfrey Leyland that there were people actually interacting with Aradia, so that's good. So in the early period, we had witches or Strega worshipping Diana and Aradia, and attending the Tregenda, which is an Italian word for Sabbat in effect. And we have these legends from all over Europe of people flying to the Sabbat, usually on their broomsticks, possibly conveyed there by devils, and meeting up with the other witches and dancing till dawn on the mountains. So there's popular legend in Germany has them flying to the Brocken mountain, especially on Walpurgisnacht, which is the same date as Beltane, and dancing under the stars and worshipping the horned god and all that good stuff, right? So the question is, did people ingest some powerful herbs and then lie down for a sleep and visit the Sabbath in their dreams, or did they actually go out to some nearby hilltop and conduct some form of ritual? We do not know. Maybe we will never know. However, towards the from about the 12th century onwards, as the church became increasingly obsessed with people conducting dodgy ritual, from the perspective of the church, dodgy ritual, they would accuse people of devil worship. Now, the whole devil worship thing came about because the church claims, and still does claim, that all other deities other than the Christian ones are, and any communication from other deities is the devil and his minions talking to you in the guise of the other deity. So basically anybody claiming to have received a communication from a pagan deity or from even a Hindu deity or anything, other than the Christian God, is still seen in some parts of the church, possibly the whole, definitely the less liberal bits of the church, as a communication from the devil, right? That was the official position of the Catholic Church for many, many centuries, and there are certainly any number of fundamentalist sects that believe exactly that, even now, right? So they don't accept any form of spiritual communication from outside the Christian paradigm. So, of course, if you tell people, hey guys, there's a bunch of people running up the mountain and having sex and taking drugs and, you know, listening to the medieval equivalent of rock and roll, and all you have to do is worship the devil to get a slice of the action, people are going to go, yes, take me to the mountain. I want to go, and, you know, I'm fed up of tilling the fields and droning on in church and all that kind of stuff, and having to tug my forelock to the local lord. I'm going up the mountain to worship Satan immediately. Where do I sign? That is basically the dynamic, isn't it? Like, if somebody tells you don't do that because, you know, you'll have too much fun, you'll be like, right, I'm off, bye. Of course I'm going to do that. So the diabolic turn, as it's called, towards witchcraft being sort of becoming diabolic during this period, as the memory of the old gods faded away, and as people, you know, people weren't literate, and so they didn't have, usually didn't have any kind of record, or, you know, maybe there were some hazy folk memories of the old gods. But I mean, in Germany, for example, they were so scared of Odin that they renamed his day, right? Because in English we have Wednesday, Woden's Day, and in German that was originally Wotanstag, but now it's Mittwoch, meaning the middle of the week, because can't mention Odin. No, he was too powerful, right? So they were really keen to kind of suppress the memory of the old gods, and that's why people kind of went, okay, what's the only other alternative to the church? Oh, that would be that Satan then. So it was kind of inevitable, I suppose. So yeah, that's how the turn towards diabolism came about. And even the word Sabbath, which we get from, you know, twisted medieval concepts about Judaism, anybody who was a heretic or somebody who'd been forcibly converted to Christianity, like a Jewish person or a Muslim who'd been forcibly converted to Christianity and was then found backsliding, could then be counted as a heretic and burnt at the stake. So that's where we get the connection with sort of Judaism and witchcraft. You know, it was just basically anybody who was outside the approved narrative of the church was regarded as suspect and liable to be persecuted. Now, obviously, this is kind of a massive oversimplification of the history of medieval Christianity, and I have completely failed to mention the Reformation, which introduced its own tensions, and that will be in a future slide. If you are interested in the history of Christianity and how it all panned out, I heartily recommend Diarmaid MacCulloch's magisterial book and TV series, The History of Christianity, because he's a great guy, and it's a really good series. And if you're suffering from any sort of feeling that, you know, Christianity is, you're afraid of because of your fundamentalist upbringing or anything like that, I promise you that reading Diarmaid MacCulloch's History of Christianity will entirely cure you of any such fear, because you'll realize what a bunch of nutters these people actually were. Like, oh, not talking to you because you don't cross yourself the right way, that kind of stuff. Or rather, we're going to burn you at the stake because you don't cross yourself the right way. Anyway, that's a bit of a digression. So yeah, I wanted to talk about Hecate, because Hecate remains a really important part of witchcraft symbolism. She is the goddess of witches, and there may have been people who were still honouring Hecate during this period. And I think one of the key themes in witchcraft of this period, and should still be a key theme today in my opinion, is the theme of transgression, of crossing boundaries and, you know, transgressing norms and generally kicking the oppressors up the backside, because the established social order, certainly in the Middle Ages, was very heavily weighted against the ordinary person. So actually not that much different to today, really, except you were more likely to be hanged or flogged or you know, tortured to death or burned. And nowadays, you know, oh well, some bad things happening nowadays, but not quite as dreadful as the Middle Ages. So when you became a witch, it was very important to what's the word? Renounce the accepted paradigm of Christianity, transgress all the boundaries you possibly could, and basically trample on the established order of things as much as you could, so that you could get out of that all-encompassing paradigm and into your own way of looking at the world. So the transgression part's really important. Okay. So the medieval image of the witch. So here we have three very interesting pictures. The first one is a couple of ladies practicing alchemy, I think. Not quite sure what they're up to because the caption of this image did not say, but I think that's what they're up to. As you can see, they're feeding like snakes and birds into some flames. They look like they're having a lot of fun, really. Now, the second picture is absolutely fascinating, and you can find a number of these on the internet. And they seem to be from around the sort of 1300s, that there was this idea that women, witches and nuns, would go around capturing penises and carrying them about in little baskets, and that there were penises that grew on trees. This is, you know, there's a huge huge industry, it seems, of these images of women mysteriously capturing stray penises, which I find terribly amusing, which is probably very childish of me. But anyway, this was a anti-witch propaganda of the day. And here we have the last picture. We have Goya from the 1600s, a Spanish artist, and we appear to have the baby eating trope in full gore here, as it were, because there's an ominous looking pole with some, which I've never actually noticed before, to be honest, in this painting. I've stared at this painting a lot and I've never noticed that before. But anyway, so here they are surrounding the Pan. Well, he's kind of like more like Pan really than the devil, isn't he? At the Sabbat, somewhere in the mountains. And yes, we will come to the baby eating trope in another slide. So, in England, the narrative around what witches did and how they related to the church was somewhat different, possibly because England had already undergone the Reformation at this point, and so there was no flying to the Sabbat. There was it was all about raising storms and making people's cattle sicken and die, and overlooking people, which meant giving them a very hard stare. Now, one of the reasons that witchcraft accusations became very, very prevalent, because it was interesting, because prior to the Reformation, there weren't as many witchcraft accusations, and in fact in the early medieval period, around about sort of 900 or thereabouts, the church had tried to persuade people that witches didn't exist and that they should stop attacking people for with witchcraft accusations. And then from about, so during the 12th, like that period, the 1100s, 1200s, people would, you would have to perform a penance if you were caught doing any kind of witchcraft activity, but there was nothing like really major. You just performed a penance and that was it. And as the accusations of devil worship went on and the heresy accusations increased, the witchcraft persecutions became much more intense. And in England, it was because the Reformation had taken place. So the king was now the head of the Church of England. And the Catholic Church no longer had power in England at this point. So now we have the Protestants persecuting witches, and this became particularly intense when, during the Commonwealth period, when Oliver Cromwell took over, and you have the Puritans in power, right? So here we have a picture of Matthew Hopkins, sort of, I think, interrogating 3 witches, and what they used to do was they would strip the witch naked, put her in a room, and wait for her imps to come to her. So woe betide her if any sort of fly or spider came into the room, because that would be taken to be her imp. And the other thing was that they were looking for witch marks, and some of the witch finders had a retractable, like a hollow knife handle with a retractable blade, because the way you could spot a witch mark was that you put a blade into it and it made no mark. Well, obviously, if you have a retractable blade that goes into a hollow handle and you poke somebody with it, it doesn't leave a mark. So, and obviously, the reason they were doing this was because you could get £10 for every witch you succeeded in convicting, and £10 was a lot of money in those days, right? So anyway, so in this picture we have these 3 witches with their imps' names. We have Illamoazar, Pyewacket, Peak in the Crown, Grizzle Greedygut, Vinegar Tom, Newes, I think, and Sack and Sugar. And you can see a hare and a funny little dog. Is it a dog or a sheep? And goodness knows what Vinegar Tom is. He's not quite sure what he is. But quite a lot of modern witches call their cats Pyewacket, because after the name of the familiar in this picture. So because in England the way the witchcraft persecutions were very different, and the main underlying cause, according to Keith Thomas in his magisterial work Religion and the Decline of Magic, as the monasteries were abolished and the Reformation took over, the monasteries ceased to exist. So they had previously given out a lot of charity, and so they would give people shelter, they would give them food, clothing, and that charitable function was completely removed at the Reformation. So this meant that there were now lots and lots of beggars wandering around the countryside, starving. So the Vagrancy Act was introduced to prevent those beggars from going from one parish to another to try and get food. And there was a lot of competition for land. So if you were a widow, especially a wealthy widow, and you lived on your own and maybe you had a cat for company, your neighbours could accuse you of witchcraft. And if you didn't have any money, then you might be begging at somebody's door, and then the person would kind of refuse to give you anything because they were poor themselves, and then they would feel guilty, and then the woman would wander away muttering under her breath, right? And then the householder would go, oh, they cast a spell on me. And because they felt guilty that they hadn't given anything, they would then get a stomachache or cramps or something, and then they go, she bewitched me. And of course, the thing about the wealthy widows who lived on their own and had a cat was that if you successfully accused someone of witchcraft, you got to take over their land. So there's another incentive to accuse somebody of witchcraft. So I think, I'm not sure because I haven't studied I've studied the witch persecutions in England to some extent. I have not really studied the ones in Europe, but I would imagine a similar dynamic was happening there, particularly in Protestant countries. So worth noting that in England, because witchcraft was a secular crime or a felony, it was punishable by hanging in England, and in Scotland and Europe it was a heresy and it was punishable by burning. So if you see a historical depiction of a witch in England being burnt, it is completely incorrect, because witches in England were hanged. He obviously ended up just as dead, but it possibly wasn't quite as unpleasant. So yes, as I said, in Europe, witchcraft was a heresy, and we had quite different images of, you know, the Sabbat and the Tregenda. So here on the left, we have a romantic 19th century painting of some witches dancing around a fire. They look like they're having a lot of fun. And on the right, we have some witches from Italy, some streghe, making the game of Benevento, which you will be familiar with from the Gospel of Aradia. If you're not, look it up. And we can see a very similar engraving to this on the bottle of Strega, the modern liqueur from Italy that you can still buy, and still has a picture of some witches dancing under a tree on the label, and it's very nice. So highly recommended. And notice that, yep, there's a broom and there's a goat. There's a, basically looks like Pan really, because he's got goat legs, and yes, and there's some of them have left some of their brooms parked in the foreground there. So I think that's a 19th century image as well. So in Germany, we have a very interesting picture, because now lots of the writings on Hebamme and Hexen haven't actually been translated into English, it would appear. Now, Hebamme is the German word for a midwife, and it's the Heben to Heben basically means to heave, right? So it's a woman who heaves. And at least I think that's the etymology. I'm sure somebody will tell me I'm wrong. And a Hexen is the German for witch. Well, Hexen is the plural. Hexa is the singular. So I copied some text here from a German website, and it means the following. The expression the witch first appeared towards the end of the Middle Ages. It was relatively newly created from older expressions such as Hegera, Hagesusa, or Hagia, which was from Greek. The wise, the knowing, the knowledgeable, mostly older woman who lived on the Absites, I think that means lived on the outskirts of the village, right? Auf dem Hag, up against the hedge. So the Hag means a thorny strip, a thorny hedge, and the edge of the village, or the edge of the community. So that is where we get the concept of, so Hagesusa is obviously cognate with Hegtesser, meaning a hedge rider. So In fact, the word hexa comes from hedge rider or Hagazuse, right? So the person who lives on the edge of the village. So yes, that concept of living on the edge of the village is a lot older than I thought. So it's interesting. Quite often midwives would be accused of witchcraft. Now, the thing about a midwife is that she knows how to help people give birth. Quite often she's also the layer out of the dead. And she knows the herbs that will help you to have an easeful birth. But she also knows the herbs that help to give you an abortion if you need one, which would have been highly frowned on and highly taboo. So because the midwives would have known a lot of herbs, a lot of herbalism, a lot of traditional law of how to help women give birth, they are seen as having a power over life and death. And this made the medieval church and medieval patriarchy, in fact, extremely uncomfortable. Now, as far as I know, there is no evidence of this conflation of witches and midwives in English-speaking countries. It seems to be purely a German thing, but I have actually seen copies of like medieval and early modern chapbooks from Germany with engravings of midwives and witches doing bad stuff. And you know, they had like a chapbook was like an early modern newsletter, right? So then people would send these things around and it would be told in all the villages, so the people who could read would read it to the people who couldn't read. So the interesting thing about these chapbooks is that they tell us what people were thinking at the time, and there would usually be an engraving of whatever diabolic things the people were supposed to have got up to. And like I said, I don't think many of these were translated into English, or and we had chapbooks in England, but not these particular ones. So anyway, there's plenty of evidence that witches and midwives were conflated with each other. Now, this picture on the right is from Albrecht Dürer, 1491, The Four Witches, and particularly famous because here we have four women who are naked. So here is evidence that people definitely believed that witchcraft was practiced naked. Important. Right. The other thing that's really interesting about these four women is that they've all got different hats. Now, like, one of the points of getting naked in a Wiccan circle is that it makes everybody equal, because you can't tell what people's social class is if they're not wearing, I guess until they open their mouth, if they're not wearing any clothes. But these women have got like headgear and hairstyles that indicate status. Not to us, because we can't read the code, but to contemporaries of this picture, these headdresses would have indicated status. Interesting, right? And they seem to have some sort of strange beast hidden behind a curtain there as well. Anyway, so that's Dürer and his idea of witches. They also seem to have a bone and a skull. I think there's a skull in there somewhere as well. Anyway, fascinating. So that's Germany and witches. This website I found, it's in German obviously, but you can always click, if you don't speak German, you can click translate at the top. And if you do speak German, it's a great website. In fact, there's a number of, I found, while I was looking for the stuff for these slides, I actually found a number of sites in German about the witch trials in Germany. So there's a lot of stuff out there if you're interested. And provided you speak German, or don't mind Google Translate's efforts at translating German. So back to England. We have so after the witchcraft persecutions, now the last witch to be hanged in England was in 1689. There were 3 witches in Exeter, and you can go there to Exeter Castle and see their memorials. And the last witch to be burnt in Scotland was in 1722 in Dornoch in, I think it's on the west coast, I think. So the point about the 1735 Witchcraft Act is that it is, as Ronald Hutton put it, it's a heavy-handed piece of Enlightenment rationalism, because the point of the 1735 Witchcraft Act is to say quite firmly that witches do not exist. So under this law, you can still be punished for saying that you're a witch or trying to make money out of being a witch. But thankfully, you can't be hanged or other obnoxious things, or at least not legally. And of course, there were still people in the countryside who would, you know, get out the old ducking stool and try to drown the woman, you know, poor unfortunate woman they thought was a witch. But they were no longer had the force of the law behind them. So as you can see from this text, it says, "And for the more effectual preventing and punishing of any pretences to such arts or powers as are before mentioned, whereby ignorant persons are frequently deluded and defrauded, be it further enacted by the authority aforesaid, that if any persons shall, from and after the said 24th day of June, pretend to exercise or use any kind of witchcraft, sorcery, enchantment, or conjuration, or undertake to tell fortunes, or pretend from his or her skill or knowledge in any occult or crafty science to discover where or in what manner any goods or chattels supposed to have been stolen or lost may be found, every person so offending being thereof lawfully convicted on indictment or information in that part of Great Britain called England, or on indictment or libel in that part of Great Britain called Scotland, shall for every such offence suffer imprisonment by the space of 1 whole year without bail or main prize, and once in every quarter of the said year shall for every such offence, skipped a line, once in every quarter of the said year in some market town of the proper county, upon the market day, there stand openly on the pillory by the space of 1 hour, which means that you're standing at the pillory and people can lob all sorts of nasty stuff at you, like rotten food and probably worse, and must give sureties for their good behaviour, and shall be further imprisoned until such sureties be given. Now, I don't know how often people were actually prosecuted under this law, but, you know, it's obviously an improvement on saying, if you're a witch, we're going to hang you. But it's kind of worse in that, you know, they could just say that, oh, you were pretending to be a witch, so we're going to be mean to you anyway. So yeah, anyway, slight improvement on the previous legislation. And here's a late 17th century illustration of some witches flitting about and a very acrobatic cat on a broomstick. So yes, a lot of people get mixed up about the 1735 Witchcraft Act because they think that it was like more prohibitory of witchcraft than it actually was. So that concludes this week's whistle-stop tour of witchcraft and history. Some recommended reading for you. Here we have Religion and the Decline of Magic by Keith Thomas. It's very good. It's very long. You might want to skip to the bit where it actually talks about the dynamic that I described with the like the lack of charity and how and why the sociological reasons why women would get accused of witchcraft. But notice we have another naked lady with her little dog practicing witchcraft. Carlo Ginzburg, Ecstasies, Deciphering the Witch's Sabbath. I've heard this is very good. I haven't read it myself. But it basically examines the theory of whether they were literally going to a meeting place, or whether they were doing it in their dreams. And History of Witchcraft, Sorcerers, Heretics and Pagans is a very good analysis of the witch trials and such, and it's pretty accessible and readable as well. That was actually I think that was the first book I ever read on the subject, so yeah, pretty good. So, the end. Next time we're going to be talking about witchcraft and the witchcraft revival. I can't see my notes right now, so I can't remember the exact topic I had planned, but stay tuned. Stay safe out there, everybody, and blessed be.